Yeah. So apparently we are live.
Ravi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear everyone. Can we just do a quick check?
Yeah. No, it's like you can just ask a question and then start with someone, say like Nirup or Rahul, so one can continue. Otherwise, like what happens when both of us try to answer at the same time, it will be little noisy.
But you know the corollary to that is that if someone doesn't have anything to say about a question, then it's like, okay, what do you want me to say? Pass. I mean,
then we are there to the rescue.
There's Corona, man. I don't have a solution.
I think most of the questions Praveen has, I think all of you have something to say.
Okay, so apparently we are live. We're 1 minute away. I'm going to jump straight into the introductions. So welcome everybody to the webinar. The topic for today is looking back to look forward and whether we're going to see a return to the vernacular style of housing as a result of changes in design post-COVID. I'm Praveen Sethi. I'm the moderator for the webinar today. And together with me, I have Rahul, Naved, and Nirup. I'm going to do very brief introductions to each one of these and then jump straight on. Nirup Reddy runs a practice called NA Architects, which is based primarily in Hyderabad, right, Nirup?
Yeah,
and yeah, but you also, I see, have a global footprint. Do you have offices around the world as well?
Dubai also, yeah.
Right. And just briefly, you run a practice together with your wife who heads up the interior design wing. I note that there's an engineering division as well, and you have a design core or a design review team that looks at the work coming in from around the world. And is there a particular focus from the, I know that your website is not active at the moment, but from much of the work I could see it was high-end residential interior, which makes you a particularly relevant guest for us today. So
Hyderabad, actually, we're doing a lot of real estate projects also. We're doing for a lot of developers.
Okay.
And in Dubai, we do only architecture. We're not doing interior design. So
you do have an office in Dubai as well, yes?
Yeah, we have an office in Dubai. It is 5 years old.
Okay, great.
And we're doing residential, and we're doing one specialty project hospital, and then one mall also we're doing. So we're doing one basically mostly architecture there, no interiors. In Hyderabad and Bangalore also we have a small office, but we're doing mostly here. We do both architecture and interior design.
I see.
And interior design is mostly for high-end homes, as I said, but architecture we're catering for all the developers, and we're doing some commercial malls and all that.
Okay, great. And you yourself are in Hyderabad at the moment, yes? Okay, great. So I come to Navid, who's the second panelist for the day. Navid Patel heads up Architect Navid Designs, or A&D Designs. Your practice is based in Mumbai, in Pune?
In Mumbai.
Yes, but with work in both places.
Work in Pune also, yeah. Mumbai, Pune, and we've just recently started in Dubai. We've just launched a company this year.
Okay.
Pre-COVID, and now it's going to be the post-COVID after that. So.
Right. So you already have a footprint. You already have an office in Dubai. Is that right? Okay. And you're a graduate of Kamaraja. I see that, a Bombay boy like myself. You have also, could you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that your practice is doing?
Since our inception, we have designed multiplexes, we've done malls, we've also designed, so our core right now is residential design, and that's how it's been drifted towards. And so we've been doing architectural design for residences in Pune. We're doing a redevelopment projects in Bombay. And of course, with a lot of high-end residences, interior designs along with it. Yes, we've done a couple of projects in Aurangabad. We've done a couple of projects in a city called Latur, which is very interiors of Maharashtra. So yes, we have done a mix of residential, commercial, and institutional architecture.
Hold on.
Okay, great. And moving finally on to our third panelist, who's Rahul B. Singh from RLDA Designs. Welcome, Rahul. I think you are officially maybe the furthest away from me with being in Delhi. And Rahul runs practice called RLDA along with his partner Lakshmi. Am I getting it that right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And I think from all three of us, I have the pleasure to say, Rahul, I've actually visited one of your buildings, which is the Atali Ganga Resort.
Oh, really?
Yeah, near Rishikesh. We went on we went on a rafting trip, rafting and camping, and we stayed at the Atali Ganga base camp, so not at the resort.
Not at the resort. Yeah.
But we did go there for a cup. We went there for a cup of tea, so I have had the opportunity to visit one of your buildings firsthand.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice.
Yeah. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the kind of work you guys are doing?
Yeah, I'd love to. So along with Lakshmi, who happens to be my partner in life as well as in practice, we run RLDA, and RLDA is I think we've divided it up into three components. There's the architecture studio. There's a design studio that does both interior and urban work, and then there's a dedicated research wing. And somewhere in between this, we do a fair amount of community service, and then we run an internship program for high school students who are generally interested in architecture and design. That happens over the summer.
So interesting. They have had no architectural training when they come to you as they're from high school.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow, that must be nice actually, right? To have completely unspoiled minds, as it were.
Yeah. And to be honest, they get some pretty challenging projects to do in the office. There was one year when someone had to make a bridge out of newspaper without using any staples or scissors or any implements, only newspaper to span 6 feet. And it had to take the weight of a Coke can, and it had to fail under the weight of two Coke cans. And this person had to tell me why is it structurally sound and why isn't it structurally sound when the load goes up. And when you can't use any other material other than just the newspaper, you learn techniques of material manipulation to give it strength. So there's a lot of exciting stuff that comes out of that program, and it's something that we look forward to every year. Yeah.
Nice. Cool. So now that everybody knows everyone else, I'm going to jump straight to the first question. If there's an order in which you guys would like to answer, or I can throw it open, and whoever feels like taking the question, I'm happy to do it in a more organic way rather than going 1, 2, 3. If that's okay with everybody. Yeah,
that's fine.
Great. Okay. So the first thing is that obviously we are all from except for Navid and myself, we're both from Bombay. But we have the good fortune with our panelists, at least, of being from three quite disparate metros, no doubt, but three quite disparate and distinct parts of the country. So we've got Mumbai, we've got Delhi, and we've got Hyderabad. And as we are talking about a return or a possible return to the vernacular as being the main theme of this discussion, I wonder if you guys would like to throw a little bit of light on what the vernacular actually entails, because as we know, I mean, it's easier to compare India, the subcontinent, to Europe rather than to a single country. And we have vastly different cuisines and ways of dressing, and of course, languages, and that extends to our architecture as well. So I'm sure that we can find quite profound differences in the vernacular of Mumbai, of Hyderabad, and of Delhi. So if anybody would like to start addressing that.
So I think I'll let me start from Hyderabad and Andhra. Now we divided by 2 states, but before it was same, like mostly Chennai and all these are the same line. So when we go back to our old vernacular style of architecture, I think mostly in these kind of regions we had, one thing was the commonly available material we had was stone. So we had different kinds of stones. That was a basic building material where we used to build homes. I mean, the brick was the after thing. And then when it comes to the style of homes, mostly they had one, lengthier veranda in front of the house where it used to be a meeting place or evening get. It used to be a multi-purpose space where people in front of the house, everyone used to have a small veranda, which was common, and then they used to have a main door. So they used to have a small platform, small platform, and then they used to have a main door. So that is a small space where you interact with people walking on the street, and this was old way of thing. Another one was most of the houses here, they call them like in Telugu they call Mandawa Houses. Mandawa is like open courtyard in central courtyard, which is open to sky. So where that part of the house was mostly for people used to use it for all kinds of purposes. Say the women used to use it for drying vegetables, drying cereals, and drying something. Children used to play. It was like multi-purpose space where it was used and it used to get a lot of positive energy. And that time, I think because of the houses were crowded in the cities or villages, it was a little different, but mostly in houses they had common walls also. So I think this is one place where we used to get sunlight and privacy. So they never used to have openings onto the outer walls. So this courtyard used to be like a small get-together space, and it was a multi-purpose space, and basically it used to be for light, everything. So this is what I think most of the parts from where I come. So these were two things where we had in common.
Right. And sorry, when you talk of the front porch and the internal courtyard, are these two distinct typologies of houses, or you'd often find the same in a single dwelling?
Some had both the things. It was again depending on the space available for each family. So it depends on how you were. So the veranda was a common thing because it was like a small veranda was a common thing in most of the houses, even if the space was small. But courtyard was again depending on how much space they had.
Sure. Okay. Now, would you like to go next? Or?
Yeah, I can take over. So basically, the vernacular architecture, to start with, it's actually acclimatized to climate, functionality, and the local available resources. Okay, so that's where we define vernacular architecture in terms of its adaptivity in these three factors. Now, looking at Maharashtra and Mumbai and Pune, it's not too different what Nirup actually said, that the temperature and the climate of Maharashtra is not too different from Hyderabad. So we have hot, humid, dry, and very hot temperatures. Now, when we look at the vernacular architecture over here, is that what is the response of the built form to the climate, basically? Okay, that's where we started with. That's the science of architecture. So we look at the Gondias and the Vadas, okay, which are the vernacular houses of the Maharashtrian people. So when we look at the Gondias, now I selected these two houses because they have two vast differences in their layout. Gondia is actually a layout where you have a central space, a room, okay, and there are surrounding activities or spaces which revolve around the main room. And this main room is actually the master bedroom of the house. Okay. Now this is situated on a plot, okay, where it is, and then you have, that's one mass of built form, okay. And then you have the surrounding ancillary features, that is the cattle houses, you have the restrooms, you have the other guest rooms and all that, which are actually forming in a way a courtyard for the entire setup. Okay. So when we look at that, when we look at the planning of that, okay, it's a little different than the Vada. Now, when we look at the Vada is more of made of three factors. One is an open space, a semi-open space, and a built form. Okay. So the open space is actually the core, which is in the center. Then you have the semi-open space, which is the veranda, which revolves around the courtyard and which interlinks the courtyard to the built form. And the built form actually encloses all over again everything around it, okay, forming it into a introvert space. So the courtyard actually becomes very special. At the same time, it becomes private. And though a very important factor is the lighting and the ventilation. So we need a very good cross ventilation in our kind of climate. So what it generally does is the courtyard gets in the cool air, okay, the hot air comes in, and then it passes on through the pitch roofs of the houses. So that's where we emphasize on the height of the houses, okay. We need to have the height within the rooms. That is where a main emphasis has to come in our kind of this practice of architecture, is the hot air actually dissipates from the ventilation in the roof. So that's how the whole circulation of the airflow takes place in the entire that's where you don't even need an air condition. A small little opening in the roof and a good opening into the veranda or the courtyard can actually serve the purpose, keeping the house very cool throughout the day and keeping the sun away at the same time, because you don't have to really bother whether you're facing the east, west, north, or south, because the courtyard is actually surrounded by the built form all around. So yes, so these three factors actually define the structural aspect of the house that is there. Now, verandas are visually defined in various ways. You have wooden columns, you have stone columns. Some people are using wood columns, some people are using stone columns in that. And then the basic form is of built form is the brick and mud, basically, which what they used to build with that. Yes, wood is also one of the parts because the pitch roofs has been derived from the wood aspect, which is there.
Right.
So yes, so the climatic ecological function, the social function, and the local material availability of the local resources and the labor actually is, I feel, where can define the vernacular architecture very well.
Okay, thanks for that. Rahul, you wanna take over?
Yeah. You know, I'm really lucky. I'm like super lucky because I live and I practice in a part of the country that has a composite climate, or at least used to have a composite climate. You know, I mean, we used to have cold winters and hot summers and rainy monsoons, and now, of course, we have a pollution season and a reasonably hot year through and through, with maybe about 10 cold days. And I remember my grandparents' house out here having a fireplace, which is, you know, you can't imagine. I mean, you don't only put in a fireplace right now because of enthusiasm, you know, shock, as one would say. But the point I'm making is that the word and the notion of vernacular changes a lot with time, and one has to ask oneself what vernacular is one looking at. Let me give you an example. I think about 3 or 4 kilometers away from each other is Shah Jahanabad and New Delhi, or maybe, you know, it's a stone's throw from each other. Yeah? And they're both built predominantly with sandstone. Yeah, they both have a very strong urban form. Yeah, but they couldn't be more different than they are. You know, I mean, New Delhi has wide roads, huge the Lachin zone has 1 acre, 2 acre plots of land with big gardens, and then Shah Jahanabad has an urban form that's a lot denser. It's got courtyards, it's got narrower streets. You know, all the sort of quote unquote passive cooling strategies that come in. But the vernacular is influenced as much by a sociological impetus. You know, the way families live, the way cities organize themselves, the way communities organize themselves, as it does by the influence of legislation. You know, things like bylaws and master plans and things like that. And so if you ask me, Rahul, you know, what's the vernacular of Delhi? And I'm like, okay, how far back do you want me to go? Or what,
Sure.
I mean, do you want me to talk about post-independent Delhi, when these were all single-story houses with a Barsati, or Delhi today, where the same residence is you know, a 4-story apartment, cozy apartment block. I mean, not an apartment block like you have in Bombay, but you know, the individual apartments, the same sort
of course,
of.
in Delhi, I think you've got so many more layers to the city because of the various occupants and rulers that you've had, and almost quite distinct quarters of the city. 7, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Correct. And there's migration, and so with migration, you have different people's ideas of what a city should be, how space should be structured and should be used. And then there was the whole notion of technology and typologies. I mean, in the 1950s, lifts were not common. So we didn't have such high buildings in Delhi. We didn't have air conditioning. Right now, we look at passive cooling not as the only way of cooling a building, but we look at it as something that supplements air conditioning, because air conditioning is all pervasive. So the vernacular has also changed. And I think it's important to look at it and not as a static construct, but as a dynamic thing. And the question for us architects is, how do we engage with the vernacular, and how do we engage with what part of it? The past, the past is not a solution. The past is a repository of knowledge. And the question is, how do we use that?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's it.
So thank you so much, Al, because you've kind of led us almost very fluidly into my next point, which is, and maybe therefore you should be the first person to keep to answer to keep the continuity going.
Oh dear.
No, so one of the things that that springs to mind almost instantly when we talk about open spaces in homes, and when I say homes, I'm for the moment putting aside apartments and so on. I'm talking about houses built on plots. And one of the first people that comes to mind, or types of architecture that comes to mind when you're talking of open spaces, is, for me at least, Jeffrey Bawa and the idea of tropical modernism, and the idea that that there's this very fine line, or almost no line, that there's this blurring between what is interior space and what is exterior space, and how you do that. And Nirup has spoken of verandas, and we've all spoken of courtyards, and you talk about larger openings and greater overhangs, and a very lush landscape. And I think we are subtropical. We're not Sri Lanka, but we're not a million miles from there either. And so how has this idea of boundaries between built and open spaces blurring, increased ventilation, when I say natural ventilation, focus on local resources, and building with cool materials, has any of this traditionally or thus far informed the kind of work that you're doing? And whether it has or hasn't, how do you see it happening moving forward?
Okay, I think there are a number of questions that are sort of rolled into that one, and so I'm going to try and give each one a stab. Yeah, I think to answer you very directly, yes, it's something that's very central to the work that we do at RLDA. Yeah, the relationship between open space and closed spaces, and I think I'm not alone in saying that. I mean, I think that's with most, if not all, architects. But at the same time, I think it's also important to note of how we define the challenges and the criterias and what's important in a project. So let me give you a small example. Yeah, I could have a house. I could have a plot of land that has a fantastic view, and I say, okay, I'm going to make this huge sort of plate glass living room. Yeah, so I can look at this view from every corner of the room, right? And I can go to the other extreme and say, no, wait a minute, I'm not going to do this, yeah, because the moment I see the view, yeah, there's immediate comprehension, and the moment there's immediate comprehension, imagination dies. And the moment imagination dies, then that view is just something in the background. It's like a view of Lake Geneva or a view of Dal Lake in Srinagar. That you get used to it, yeah. And so you come around and say, well, wait a minute, how do you want to make that view engaging? Yeah? And you say, well, I'm going to do the polar opposite. I'm going to make a solid wall all through, and a little bit above eye level, so I have to go on my tiptoes. I'm going to make a small, maybe 6-inch by 6-inch window, yeah, which frames something. Yeah. Now, by restricting access to that view, yeah, you've made that view something of greater value. So the question then is that we have to frame what part of the outside or the inside that we want. Do we want it, and what, I mean, is it just view, or do you want it to act as a conduit for airflow and cooling, as Naved and Nirup were saying? And that's where that's where architecture becomes a spatial construct. Yeah, and it's a function of how we set up the constructional argument of the project. But that said, it isn't a binary. I mean, we constantly live local and we constantly live global at the same time. I was amused that you said that I'm the furthest away from the three of you, or because I'm in Delhi as against Central India or Western India, because we're all here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the question on Jeffrey Bawa and the way he used his open and closed spaces is, it's part of that greater repository of knowledge that we can dip into should we need to. It's one of those precedents that we can look into. I think replicating of it, is a bit of a cop-out, because each age has its own challenges and its own questions.
Sure.
And we need to address that. And we have a responsibility to address that in unique ways, because that's how culture develops. It develops with the new. It develops with it develops with the re-looking of the old. New interpretations of ways of using the old, because there are new typologies, a new sociological shift, etc. in that. And when one looks at local materials, etc., which was the other question that you brought up, I think it's important because with globalization, so much of architecture has become the result of industrial processes or industrialization, and it's become so much of a result of specifying rather than making. And when you get into local materials and you get into crafts and things, it almost returns architecture to one of the fundamental components of it. I mean, the fundamental component of architecture would arguably be its volumetric nature and space making. But the next thing is material manipulation, and that's where craft and comes in, and local materials and that comes in. And so I think in the post-COVID, era, I think there'll be a return to that. I mean, a return to, or I hope there's a return. Let me put it that way, to local making.
But I think it'll almost inevitably happen because supply chains will be broken, right? You won't be able to get necessarily the same materials with the same speed, certainly, that you used to. I mean, say for example, if you were using imported marble, you might now be more compelled to look towards a local stone within a 30 or a 40 or 100 kilometer radius, just because that Italian marbles are an option anymore, right?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons why a lot of imported materials became so popular, and you guys can bear me out on this, is because people started looking at architecture through two lenses. One was through the consumption of images. So the Italian marble in a particular pattern recalled the life and times of, I don't know, the Medicis. And so on one hand, on the other hand, it was a conduit for the expression of wealth, right? And so so people who could afford went ahead and they spent the money. I mean, if you have money, you need a conduit to spend it. And unfortunately, somewhere down the road, a lot of the social impetus of architecture got lost. And one of the things why I'm hopeful about the sort of post-corona era is that's the social impetus comes back into what we do. That we start looking at cities as habitats and not only as economic vehicles, or economic engines. That.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Navid, would you like to have a go at that question?
Yes, definitely. I, to an extent, agree with Rahul, because what he said, that vernacular architecture and local resources, it's like what local resources keeps changing from time to time. When you talk about local resources, a local resource like mining stone or granite or something can actually be replaced with a good formulated cement sheet or something, like something like that. And then we can adapt those ideologies visually by looking at technology where those same materials are used in terms of into the building industry, but in a minimalistic way, okay, where a granite, you don't have to really erect a granite column. You can erect a column and then you can clad it with granite. Same way goes with the wood also. We also have to look at things where we are conserving nature. So because see, we are a growing population. When we are a growing this population, we can't really have everybody and anybody having a wooden column and a wooden house and a granite stone platforms and all that solid granite woods happening in the house. Okay, because that is going to have an impact on these resources and they're going to extend in some time. So that's where we come in, is vernacular architecture. As I rightly said in the beginning, it's close to climatology, functionality, okay, and local resources. So functionality and climatology are the two main factors when we actually talk about vernacular architecture. Local resources can keep changing. Like if you take a place like Mumbai, I mean, I really hardly see any stone building or a building which is made out of full wood or something of that sort. It's a concrete jungle. So concrete over a period of time in Mumbai has actually become a local resource to do it. So then there we try and explore the possibility as to how do we bridge the gap between that. So RCC is used as a superstructure, and then you use materials like wood and granite as cladding materials, which gives you that visual aura feel. Though it's not, though it's not the genuine aspect of it, but that's where the practice can lead to. We're still using the same materials what have been used in past. We're still using wood. We're still using granites. We are still using mango tiles. We are still using the various sand and mud this mixtures, but their implementation has changed. It has changed over a period of time. Why? Is because we also have to look at technology. We are also moving ahead. When we look at the past, we also have to look at the future. Okay, so when we look at future, that's where we are trying to bridge the gap between vernacular architecture and how our futures are going to shape in terms of architecture. So, as I said, these are the main aspects of vernacular architecture building. Okay. Now, coming back to your question of Jeffrey Bauer building and the way he has designed his, I have had a personal experience of visiting one of his offices in Colombo, which has been changed into a restaurant right now, and it's like a small museum and a restaurant, a small cafe happening over there, and it's like people come in, they just relax, they just unwind themselves. There is a nice courtyard when you enter. There is a small fish pond in the middle of the courtyard. It becomes an interactive space because you stand there and you're looking at the pond and you're looking at the fishes, and the sunlight is pouring in there, and then you have the verandas around it. So it actually tried to create a story. He's actually trying to create a story using void, intermediate spaces as verandas and the built forms. Now, it's very important for all architects to actually build the stories into their practice. So we as architects, to an extent, try to get in certain aspects when we were doing the Aurangabad multiplex. So over there, it was a huge 40,000 square feet plot where it had to be just a 3-screen multiplex. So a multiplex was a big chunk of volume which was there. So in front of the multiplex, there was a huge space which was left empty. So we decided that let's not leave this place dead empty. We need to invite people into the space. Even though they don't come to watch movies, they can use this space as a promenade, because Aurangabad, this place, didn't have that kind of space in future. So we wanted to give that space to the city back, though keeping within the limits of keeping the client's interest in place. We still designed it as a promenade in place where you have the landscape where people can come, they can do picnic over there, they can go and watch movies, they can have small installations happening over there. There could be some promotions happening in that place. So it becomes interactive. So this is where when we are talking about spaces, when we talk about open spaces are not only confined to individual courtyards and verandas. When we talk about spaces in Mumbai, there are spaces in between two buildings. Now, these are the spaces where we try to, where architects and every individual has to look into how do we adapt and derive these spaces. It's a negligible factor which has affected Bombay to lead the way it is. And from time to time, what the Britishers did 300 years back and where we are now after that, it's really very sad the way we are progressive in terms of planning. Though we are building a lot of buildings, we are building high rises, we are going higher, we're doing this. But what is happening to the spaces in between? It's completely neglected. And that's the question I think I'm going to raise is what's next for these spaces?
Okay. Nice one to put a question back to the question. Well done. Let's move to Nirup.
Yeah. As Praveen asked, I mean, the question was like open spaces, use of local materials, and how do we go back to vernacular architecture? See, my thing, I'll put it in a simple way. I think probably the more green buildings and sustainable buildings, what we have been doing nowadays is like some of the elements where are coming from vernacular. Say in a green building, they say we have rating system, then we have points for local use of local materials, and then use of salvage materials, and then so most of the I think the next way to take it further is do more and more sustainable and green buildings, where I think most of these factors are covered. Say let's take ventilation, and then open spaces. And the main thing is, okay, even if you have open spaces, you need to have a lot of cross ventilation, which is a main thing. So most of these things, and then large opening of windows. So all these are basically part of a green building or a sustainable building. I mean, one of the elements. So how I take it further is like, as an architect, I think most of us are doing these sustainable buildings. So it is all about to adapt another new measures and to provide more open spaces. Again, it depends on each individual project we're doing, and it depends on individual style of architecture what we do. Because for me, even it's a small 600 square feet apartment or 700, I like to bring greenery into the home. So most of my designs, most of my homes, we do like we use a lot of we bring in a lot of greenery and a lot of fresh air and a lot of daylight. So it can be any space what we do. So again, so it depends on most of us who are doing modern day architects. So my way of doing is like I would like for anything I would like to have a good piece of land and a lot of ventilation, then good amount of light. So all these things we have been adapting. It is just that we have to when we do for private bungalows and villas. I think most of us we do this, but when it comes to developer projects, mostly we are missing because we have limitations and even the demands of the developer, and it depends on the cost of the project. So I think nowadays, like in most of the cities we live, we need to bring a lot of green spaces into homes. Maybe instead of giving smaller balconies, 2-3 smaller balconies, probably we can give one big balcony with some kind of green pocket where each individual can develop his own thing instead of telling, okay, it may disturb my facade, I want the same kind of tree all over the place. So instead of that, probably we can leave it to the owner who can develop his own green space. And terrace can be used. Most of the terraces today are used for services. If the services are planned better, I think most of the terraces can be used for. It can be, vegetables, or it can be anything. I mean, it can be some green. So most of the terraces, because we have large floor plates nowadays, so most of them can be used. So let it put it. I mean, better, more sustainable, and more green home would be a answer for your question. It can be Jeffrey Power who have been doing all this, but all this I think will sum up into these kind of architecture.
Right. And actually, that also comes back to one of the points which I wanted to bring up when you started talking about apartments with balconies, etc. And I think that you're probably the best person to answer this, because I think you're doing a fair amount of developer work, and even in the residential sector. So do you see, as obviously there's going to be people putting a higher value on outdoor spaces, on semi-enclosed, semi-covered spaces as users, as residents. right? So how is that going to affect the market? How is that going to affect commercial considerations? Because right now, obviously your enclosed space costs more per square foot than the semi-enclosed or the outdoor space. And do you see that changing? Do you see builders waking up to this and charging perhaps more of a premium for that, for the outdoor spaces than earlier?
Yeah, I think now in our Hyderabad and this part of the open spaces, as I said, if it is double height, it is not charged in this side. And another thing where we're trying to give half covered and half open. So where
Right.
it's not even covered in the FSI and people can use it. But it all depends again on the individual developer. Some of the people, when you have large balconies, are being charged like half the price and all. But awareness, pre-COVID also there have been a lot of awareness that people wanted a lot of open spaces because apartments also were slowly, because in Hyderabad now we have trend of single floor apartments, large floor plates like 5,000, 6,000 square feet. So where it is almost like a house, independent house. So we started giving larger, like 500 square feet balconies.
Yeah.
Large chunk of balconies with small. So it was like more of multi-purpose area, and people were ready for it. Maybe because they wanted it. It's like we cannot stay indoors.
Sure.
Another thing we need to see here is also, I think it depends on the climate also, because if it is very humid, sometimes people may not prefer to sit outside. So I think most of Hyderabad, Bangalore, I think most of these places would love to have more balconies, open spaces, and it was always there. But now the demand would be more. I mean, I think before a few people used to say like, why do I need a larger balcony? It was purely depending on each individual. Now maybe they will ask, okay, they may ask the builder like, we wanted a space, like we want more open space in the living spaces or somewhere where they could really use it. Definitely this would change because most of the people now, even the recent clients we had, there was a lot of difference when we talked to them, because now everyone knows, because they've been staying in home. Maybe a few people who have not stayed for 10 years, now they're staying for 2 months in home. So they know what they want, like how they have to spend the time, what were the real difficulties in a home where they were living. So definitely open spaces should be mandatory. I mean, and government should, FSI these balconies. Some of the RERA says balconies are actually not covered in RERA as per part of our thing. But it can be charged. It depends. But when you show RERA area, normally balconies are not as per RERA area in Hyderabad. So again, it depends now, how. But when I'm selling it as a totally, they're including balcony area also.
Right. You've actually, in a sense, answered a little bit of this question and also preempted the next one, but I'll put that to Naved and Rahul. So I guess that I'm now clubbing two questions into one. One is, do you think, that very simply put, it can almost be a yes or no answer, because I'm also mindful of time and there's a couple of other points. Do you think developers would charge more than they used to for, or more of a premium for a space like a balcony or a courtyard or a veranda? Yes or no? And also, do you think there's going to be an impact of that on the bylaws, on the regulations, wherein local authorities will wake up to the fact that developers are actually able to make more money off of these and therefore stop offering them free of FSI or with reduced FSI, as it were?
Can I take it?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so basically, in the era of urbanization, so we are fast moving into urbanization. Even the small towns, small countrysides are actually exploring the possibility of how mass housings can be done. Okay. Now, the main question comes in is how important vernacular architecture elements can be implemented into urban housing. So we as architects, as I personally feel, is when we talk about the courtyards and the verandas in the Vadas and the Bondias over here in Maharashtra, those are actually extensions into urban houses as terraces, as double-height terraces and balconies. Okay, so we look at it in that way. So if those things are, as we said, the planning, how Jeffrey Bawa had actually planned a courtyard and a veranda around it and created a story for it. Now, if we create the same story within the urbanization, keeping these three elements intact in place, that is the terraces, the balconies, and the built forms. And probably, as Nirup said, as rightly said, is like we as architects, as planners, have to make a conscious effort that these spaces should not go waste when we are actually designing and planning. What I meant is that you cannot have if you're given 10% space to be built as a balcony space, you can't have 3 or 4 balconies of 40 square feet and 30 square feet split over into entire area. I think it should be a collective effort where it should be a big mass chunk of, say, 100 square feet balcony area, which has been dedicated into a house where actually it becomes a utility space also. It becomes utility. You can have a family get together over there. It becomes a proper space in itself where a family can get together. So it's very important. How do we implement these elements into our design in today's time in urbanization? Again, as far as terraces is concerned, as you rightly said, in Pune they allow double out balconies, and they're calling it actually terraces, which is to an extent to a flow. But what we need to understand in Mumbai is not only the local authorities, not only the architects, even the end users, now that the COVID has come, is going to be an awakening factor for them, where they're going to realize how important are these spaces, are these and the terraces. And I hope they do respect to these spaces and abide by the laws which has been governing them.
Hello?
Hello. I think
have we lost Kabir? I mean, is something
you can continue.
I can continue.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to see it from a slightly different perspective, and that perspective has to do also with incrementality as it relates to housing and to the notion of resilience. It's people buy an apartment, at whatever age they buy one. Maybe they were married, maybe they weren't, maybe they had kids, maybe they didn't, etc., etc. But unless you're reasonably wealthy, you stick with that apartment, right? Or you sell that apartment to move into something else. I mean, that's just the economics of living. Yeah? But what balconies and other such mechanisms do is it builds in incrementality into that space, which means that when you need that extra nudge room, you have access to it. Yeah. Which is important. It sort of builds on what Nirup was saying, that in a high-rise apartment you have a big balcony and you have your small private part of green in that. So this, or maybe it was you, Navid, who said that. Maybe wrong, but so these are spaces that create opportunities for growth. They also create opportunities for customizing things. I mean, the problem with large high-rise apartment buildings is that they treat everybody as the same. And you have to. I'm not saying that as a criticism. I mean, that's the nature of the building type, right? But people and families aren't, and so you need these sort of quote unquote other spaces that allow people to either express themselves or grow into them, or take away from. And balconies and terraces are one of those spaces. So I see that as a very, very important component of housing, etc. And it should certainly not come under an FAR or something like that. We can't treat outdoor space as an economic instrument. I mean, those are, it's like I'm charging you for fresh air. I mean, I do know I charge you for bottled water, but in the same thing. So yeah.
There should be a window tax, right?
That's right.
For example. So,
yeah, there you go.
Charging you for natural light. There you go. So,
yeah. Anyway, so yeah, that's the short answer you were looking for.
Okay. Thanks for that. I'm a bit wary of time, and we've only got about 12 minutes left. So I do have more stuff to ask of you guys, but I would also just like to throw the discussion open to see if there's questions from any of our audience. So if there are, there's a Q&A section, there's a chat section. Encouraging anyone who wants to put up any questions for any of our panelists, perhaps on something that we've already discussed, or if you want to pick up a new thread. In case not, then I think we can go back because I've got a fairly exhaustive list still.
Oh no.
No, I didn't ever expect that we were going to get through the entire list, but well, either people are slow to type or we have no questions. Okay. In either case, I'm gonna chuck the next point open, and in case there are any questions, then I might jump in and and give way to that instead. So one of the things that that Rahul said strikes back as he said that the vernacular is not a static construct and it keeps changing, right? And that's a very important point, I think, because 200 years from now, when people look back at the kind of houses or flats that we're living in, perhaps this is what is looking vernacular for them rather than what was there 600 years ago. But keeping that in mind, there are obviously changing requirements because of lifestyle. I mean, there are certain typologies of space that didn't exist, even when Navid was talking about the traditional houses of Maharashtra, I spoke about the central room being the master bedroom, so to speak. I mean, one could argue that nowadays that's sort of the living room, and the living room in those spaces was probably the courtyard. What I mean to say is we have, especially with the advent of COVID, we're talking about a lot of people working from home. So you're talking about a home office or a studio. You're talking about, I don't know, maybe in a larger house, you're talking about a server room or an automation space, or you're talking about a gym or an exercise room in larger flats. These requirements obviously didn't exist earlier in terms of what was perceived to be the vernacular historically. I mean, you don't have 15th century houses with home gyms in them. So how does, when one looks back at the vernacular, at least the historical vernacular, how does one bring things like that on board? And sorry, I'm going to interrupt my own question because I do have an audience question, which I think should supersede mine because I've been talking long enough. So there's something come up saying, hi, what changes do you expect in the lighting industry due to COVID? Maybe slightly off track because we are concerned more with open spaces, but we could talk about natural light, for example. Anyone want to have a go at that? What changes do we expect in the lighting industry?
I don't think there'd be any change in the lighting industry. I'm not sure.
No, I mean, any changes in the lighting industry because of Corona? I mean, or post-COVID?
Yeah,
Corona?
that is the question. Yeah. I mean, there are one or two things that spring to mind for me, but I don't know how relevant they are to the discussion. But UV light, for example, if you say, throws up a whole new world of sterilization and sanitization and so on. But anyway, Rahul, I think you were about to say something.
No, I think that's a good question that's linked to whether there are any typological changes to, let's say, houses in terms of, let's say, their home offices that need more quote unquote office-like lighting for tasks that have to happen there, and because and that color temperature and that lux level, etc. And because in the evening that same space has to revert to being something else, are the lighting fixtures flexible enough to do that? So to that extent, and I think those solutions are already out there in the market. I mean, there are a number of lighting companies who are doing that, creating that sort of flexibility in that. So that's probably where that would be.
So basically, lighting that has to cater to living and working requirements.
Now, I mean, the question comes in that, okay, supposing you're a dentist and you're working instead of a clinic outside and you need, medical lighting, which is extra bright and all of that. Yeah. And then in the evening, you want to convert that into your, I don't know, whatever. Then that's really asking for a lot from your lighting. But
no, fair enough. Okay. Do we have another question? Sir, is the CCT changing light is the future? Okay. We seem to have a lot of people interested in lighting coming into the discussion. but is color temperature changing light in the future? I think we're already seeing that happening, but yep. Anyone want to have a go at that? Again, I'm not sure how related this is particularly to open spaces.
What's the question again?
Is CCT changing light in the future?
CCT.
Color temperature. Color temperature. Yeah. I mean, we already have lighting and domestically available lighting that is. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Navid.
He said, I think he's already given the answer to that, and think in his explanation earlier.
Yep. I think he has. Okay. So we've got 5 minutes left. Oh, hang on. We do have another question from Chetan regarding the new concept of work from home, redesigning lighting with respect to efficient working. Lighting will be a focus area for designing the spaces. Again, something you touched on, perhaps? Yeah, so I think Rahul is very efficiently foreseen all possible lighting questions with your answer. So, yeah.
As they said, let there be light, and there was light.
Yeah, let there be light. Let there be white light in the day and yellow light in the evening, and then
I think unless and until he's doing some editing studio or something where you don't really like. Yeah. So it's like you don't need light, and then you need light. So I mean, that's where.
Yeah. No, but I think that the point I made is a valid one, that basically working and living have quite different requirements in terms of technical and mood lighting, and so light fixtures and manufacturers of light fixtures will have to keep up with that if people are to continue to work from home.
Yeah. No, I'll add to that also. There's a very strong social aspect towards going to work. You step out of the house, you meet a different set of people. There's work that's going on. There are also your friends, etc., etc. Now, when you're working from home, all of that has gone. All of that is gone. You're just sitting, looking at a Zoom screen in the way we are, right? And you need a change of scene, yeah. And you can't really sort of get up and you can, but you not to the extent you can in an office. Walk around and meet somebody else. Because it's a residential environment, yeah. And where lighting comes in that is that because of the flexibility in the types of lighting, their color temperatures and their dimming systems and all of that, yeah, you have more control of your interior environment, and you can offset that sort of fatigue that sets in as well. You can because it's customizable. B, I don't have to worry about what my coworker thinks. Whether I want to work under really bright light or whatever. Yeah. So that's what it does. It allows reduces some fatigue and some customer. It's good. It's good.
Here's another question that I'm not sure is related to open space or the vernacular, but do you think imports from China will be impacted in the coming future?
Yeah, I think it will be affected, but I think it's time we all start designing something and making something on our own from here, because I don't know, something continues like this for a year. We cannot be dependent on someone, some other country or something. Probably I think it's time where we have to rethink and restart. Maybe most of our business people should think and start some furniture industries and something, because we can make, and even the labor is comparatively cheaper than China. It's only we have to regroup, and it's all about starting few things, and we need some initiatives from the government.
I'm not so sure about that, and it's a complicated answer or it's a complicated question, because there's a reason why the world went to China for products. I mean, China was the world's factory, right? And yes, there was a virus, and it spread like quote unquote wildfire. Yeah? But that isn't to say that right now that virus isn't in India or in our Indian factories. Yeah, I mean, it could very well be there. So then the question comes in is that, okay, are we not importing from China just to sort of out of spite? Yeah, and we're willing to take a hit on either a level of quality or price competitiveness because of that. And if our pricing and our quality was equally good, then why weren't people sourcing from us earlier?
in the
You know, I
first
mean,
place. Yeah.
in first
Yeah.
place. Also,
Yeah.
for us to ramp up to that level is going to take time. It's going to take capital, and it's going to take time. I mean, the economy is not in the world's best place at the moment.
Yeah.
And how patient are we? I mean, we still want to, go out and buy whatever we can. I mean, we'll still inquire what the price of something is, and if we get a deal on it, I mean, are we really thinking about, or how much are we thinking about
Yeah.
where it came from? I mean, you know, ethical products, for whatever reason, unfortunately, aren't mainstream. I mean, they should be, but they're not mainstream for the same reason. You know, it's a cost thing.
Great. And we've managed all that with 1 minute to spare. So excellent.
Yeah.
I want to take time to say goodbyes and thank yous to everybody. Thanks to everybody who attended. Thank you to our panelists, Nirup, Navid, Rahul.
Yes.
I'm
Thank
sure
you too.
Yep. No,
Thank you,
it's very enlightening, I'm sure. Thank you all. Stay well,
Yeah.
stay safe, stay indoors. Well,
Yeah.
depends which state you're in,
I'm
but
glad.
yeah,
Yes, with enlightening, I'm glad we ended on another lightning question.
exactly. Exactly. All right, guys. Thanks very
Okay,
much. I'm going to
cheers.
log off.
All the best. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Stay
Logging
safe.
off too.
Thank you.